Hi everyone, thank you for joining. We're just going to make a start shortly. We're just waiting for a few more people to join and then we will make a start. Thank you everyone. While we're just waiting for a couple more people to join, if you don't mind putting in the chat your name and where you're based, and maybe something you're hoping to get out of the session, potentially if you attended our last session, that would be great. Amazing. Well, whilst we're waiting for people to put it in the chat, I'll start off with the intro. So just to introduce the session, today's session is 102 Effective Use of AI Intermediate Prompting with Mike Weston-Burt. So just quickly on our code of conduct, please be aware of others, be friendly and patient, be welcoming and respectful, be open to all questions and viewpoints, be understanding of differences, and be kind and considerate to others. So just to introduce myself, my name is Rianne. I am the program manager for the London Reactor. Microsoft Reactors are hubs for technical learning and sharing, where students and developers and startups can connect globally or with a local community. We have a number of reactors located across the globe. Today, you're dialing into the London Reactor. And Microsoft Reactor provides events, training, and community resources to help students, developers, and startups build on AI technology and more. So if you'd like to find out more about the Reactor and what we do, please feel free to scan the QR code. Right now, I'll hand over to Mike for today's session.
Welcome, welcome. I think some of you may have joined us last week for the introductory sort of 101. 101 is an American term for sort of base level. This is taking things up to the next level up. So my assumption is you've got some working knowledge around AI. I'm going to look at some of the various tools that have been coming out over the last probably 4 or 5 months. I'll repeat it later, but you can see my contact details on screen. If you scan that QR code, that'll take you to my LinkedIn page. I do have a number of handouts, ones that I used last week, but also some additional new ones if you came to last week's session as well. So please feel free to contact me either through LinkedIn or through my email address. I will, a bit later on in the presentation, also re-advertise that as well. In terms of what I'm trying to get out of this morning session, or maybe afternoon if you're in a different part of the world from London, particularly go to more detail of some of the models like reasoning models, thinking models, deep research, some of the tools that you can use around Canvas, around how you can, with tools like Claude, actually set up your own personal writing style. And I always like to start with a little bit of fun. And everybody's worried, is AI going to steal my job? Personally, I don't think it is. What it will be doing is radically changing the types of jobs that we have. That's for a later session. But for now, I'm just going to actually kill my video feed. I've not got the greatest broadband and I don't want to lose the connection. But for those that haven't met me before, I spent the best part of 3,500 years working in Big Four professional services, and therefore risk is very much at the heart of everything that I do, and was drummed into me over years of working for Big Four. And I will make no apologies for banging this drum several times today. Just to remind you, you'll have seen on a lot of the AI models, it says they can make mistakes. So please be careful what you're sharing with the models, information, personal sensitive data, and also keep your critical eye open at all times for what you're taking out of these models. I think if you're in doubt, stop, don't do anything, think, go and ask an expert before you start putting things into these models. Not trying to scare you, but just trying to be a little bit realistic and just caution you to use these models sensibly. Just for a recap for those that joined us last time or those that are new to us, we're going to do a little bit of quizzing using a tool called Menti. And you can either scan that QR code with your phone, and use your phone as a handset for answering the questions, or you can go to menti.com on your web browser and use that 8-digit code. The code appears at each question. So let me go quiet for a few seconds whilst you vote away on this first quiz question. And Rianne, there's a question from Richard. Is it possible to turn on auto captions? I don't know if you have the ability as the host to do that. Thanks for asking, Richard. And we got a couple of jokers thinking it's what we use in Las Vegas. But extra house points to Gryffindor for those that got the correct answer. Next little quiz question. Can you remember what the context window is? The context window. Slytherin getting in there with some correct answers. Well done, Slytherin House. And the final question in this little trio. Can you remember what a persona is in the world of AI? Marvelous, marvelous. Well done, Hufflepuff. Full marks to you. Yes, so tokenization in AI, subtly different in Web3, is where it's breaking the English words or Spanish or French words that we're putting into the model into smaller subunits called a token. It then actually allocates a numerical value, and it creates the output again by stringing tokens together. Context windows. If you joined us last time, I used the analogy from the Star Wars movies. I'm of a certain age. I was lucky enough to go in 1977 to see the opening night of the first ever Star Wars movie. And you may remember that the Star Wars movies start with a scrolling text that explains the backstory, the evil empire and the Jedi Knights. And as this sort of fourth and fifth paragraph appears at the bottom of the screen, the first paragraph drops off the top and you can't read it anymore. Well, the context window is a bit like working memory, that after so much time, some of the early part of your conversation falls off the top of the screen the way the Star Wars scroll did. There is a technique called a memory recall, and it's part of the handouts that I'll send you a little bit later. I suspect this problem in the medium to short long term will go away. Some of the more modern models like Gemini have up to a 2 million token context window. And I think probably 2-3 years, every model will have almost an infinite context window. So this problem will disappear. But for now, it's important to know. The other thing are personas, which are certainly optional, but I definitely recommend thinking about using personas. Top tip, though, don't just ask for project manager. These models are trained on huge quantities of data. Think the internet. The internet's got some fantastic stuff, but also lots of rubbish. And there's lots of people out there who claim to be a project manager, really aren't. So instead, ask for project manager of 30 years experience in industry XYZ with, say, professional qualifications of Prince 2 and the PMP. That way, when it's looking through its data, it will pick out people who are actually more likely to be good project managers and then give you a better quality output. So this prompting thing that everybody's talking about, this is the way that we provide an input to these generative AI models, usually in the form of a sentence or maybe several sentences, a paragraph, and often maybe in the form of a question. And this will then guide the output of the generative AI models. And prompts can range from very simple ones. If I was a biology teacher, explain photosynthesis. I might then want to expand that, explain the different stages, carbon dioxide in, chlorophyll, water, oxygen out again. And then maybe amplify, why is photosynthesis so important to the Earth's ecosystem? A screen you might want to take a screenshot of or a photograph of, I will include it in the handouts. But a little mnemonic I find very useful. Just before I hit the enter key, just think, have I crafted a good prompt? So C is for character, persona, optional, but certainly worthwhile considering. R, well, that's the actual request. What is it you want the model to do? E is for examples, sometimes referred to as dots, and we'll talk about that in more detail in this section. A is for adjustments. Do you want maybe the output in table format, bullet points? Type of output, maybe it's a blog post, an essay, an email. And then E is for any additional optional extras. Maybe you like it to stop and maybe ask you some clarifying questions. And we'll see that when we get to the thinking and reasoning models a little bit later. Some common pitfalls, because I'm seeing a lot of people make some very basic mistakes with these models. It's very easy to be vague. If you consider these models a little bit like having some very bright summer graduate university students working for you on a summer job, very bright, very enthusiastic, but they do need guidance, properly briefing. If you give them a vague topic, chances are it'll be a vague answer. And the same with these machines. It's easy to overload the prompt. I do a 103 advanced prompting course as well. And in there, we talk about a model called layering, where you actually build the prompt over 2 or 3 iterations rather than dumping everything in one go and overstretching, overloading the model. And finally, back to my importance of always check the outputs. You may have heard of the phrase hallucinations, where it gives you what looks like valid information, but is factually incorrect. You may have heard the US Ministry of Health, a recent report, half the drugs that were mentioned were made up by the AI that did the report. Now, maybe in the future, these drugs will exist, but they don't work today. So you do need to always keep that critical eye open for potential hallucinations. Certainly the more modern models are doing this less. But if you're again using the vagaries of internet and poor prompts, you might get hallucinations back. So a couple of reasons why we're doing this sort of intermediate prompting. You're fully aware now that prompting is a core skill along with communication, collaboration, computational reasoning, etc. But you're probably also aware that using these machines, we are burning electricity and water at data centers all around the world. In fact, I think the head of OpenAI just last week was explaining how much the energy and water one prompt uses. So we want to think about the environment a little bit and not just put out loads of badly crafted prompts that are in effect wasting scarce resources. Now, we still need to go backwards and forwards a number of times when we are prompting to get to a optimal output. But if you're much more aware of what a good prompt looks like and how to interact, not only will you get to a better, quicker answer, but you'll also be saving the planet by burning less resources. So I mentioned this sort of idea of thinking of these models the way you would having bright assistants. I used to talk about bright university graduates. I'm now talking about DPhils, doctorates, because the level of pseudo-intelligence these machines are now working at is getting up to a phenomenal level. A new thing is, do be careful about accidental breach of copyright, especially perhaps if you're making pictures, images. One of my recent clients wanted to create what looked like sort of a can of Pepsi or Coca-Cola, but with their logo on. And in fact, it was the same red that Coca-Cola uses and the same font that Coca-Cola uses. The only change was their company name rather than Coca-Cola. You may have heard that Disney is at the moment in a huge legal lawsuit with Midjourney, the big image generation company, because so many of their images look so identical to Disney images of stormtroopers, Alice in Wonderland, various Disney princesses. So just again, keep your critical hat on that you couldn't accidentally be in breach of copyright. In case anybody came in late or missed it the first time, this is my name and my email address. And also that little QR code will take you to my LinkedIn. So do take a screenshot or a photo of this. Love to hear from you and that I can share with you the handouts that I've got associated with today's course. So that was a little recap to bring us up to sort of 101 level. What I now want to do is go through a number of more intense deep dive, especially over modifications, updates we've seen in the last 4, 5, 6 months. And we're going to start with reasoning. And Veronique, you asked about layering. No, in fact, what you do is in the first round of a layer, you give a high level view of the prompt. And in the second layer, you then give more nuance to the prompt. And in the third layer, you put more nuance again. So you build up, a little bit like giving a human being perhaps a high level overview of the task, and then breaking it down into a couple of subunits to make it easier to digest. But good question, Veronique. 2 extra house points for Gryffindor there. These reasoning models, and you will find a lot of them now may have a button, perhaps even says reason or maybe deep think or think further, depending on which tool you're using. But the big difference between perhaps here and the non-reasoning models is with the non-reasoning, you often look at the quality of how quickly they can reply. And models like Mistral are very quick to reply. With the reasoning models, they actually stop and think. And if you joined us last time, we talked about a technique called chain of thought, where you actually, in the prompt, say, think step by step. And it gets the model to slow down. And the way a human person might think about a problem before answering, the machine does the same. And they'll probably tell you thought for 10 seconds, 1 minute, 3 minutes. Top tip, it's always worthwhile twice running these. The first time run it and then see its thinking process, because these models will demonstrate to you the logic they went through. A bit like asking your summer student, well, run through me the steps you went through. What was the approach or the method that you used? Because you might ask them to redo it and maybe slightly change step 3 and step 6. The same with the large language models. So here I'm slightly refining my prompt. And this time it took almost twice as long, 19 rather than 9 seconds. And again, you can see the logic that it's thinking through, including with the red box, I'll need to ask, because the prompt had asked me to stop and ask for input from the user. So I was looking to go on a long weekend to Paris with my wife. So it stopped and asked me. I put in Paris, and then it thought for another 21 seconds, and then haven't got room on the screen. It asked me a series of other questions before coming out with this response. So whereas with the non-thinking, it would give me a very quick reply, but probably not very good, by taking its time and thinking and asking me some questions, it came up with a much richer, better output. Now, a lot of the models are now adding citations, links to the websites, or if you're, say, in a Microsoft graph, perhaps the documents in SharePoint that it used. So with your critical hat on, your critical eye, you can go and check the veracity of the source documents to make sure you're happy that they've used valid sources of information and they make sense and there's no hallucinations. This is from OpenAI, and it's their sort of hot tips or templates for a good structured prompt for these reasoning models. So start with a goal, then have the format you want them to come back in, then any constraints, any warnings, guardrails, and then at the bottom, the kind of the detailed context dump. So the example here is going on a hike in San Francisco. And what you want is to return it in terms of distance and time and how long it takes to drive to get to where the hike starts, etc. The warnings, be careful about naming the trail, and then the context. My girlfriend and I, da 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 da, etc. Now, I retook that Paris prompt and put it into that advanced style. And then when I reran it, this was the output I got. Again, I've not got room on the screen for the whole output, but to my mind, a much better quality, nuanced output. And again, part of the handouts I can send on later includes that little AI structure. I'll just bring it up quickly in case anybody wants to take a screenshot or a photo of that. But this actually came from OpenAI themselves. And I was very impressed by using that structure, how much more nuanced the reasoning was. My next little quiz question, can you remember in the world of AI, what is a shot? What is a shot? Let me go quiet for a few seconds. Oh, intriguing. We've got a little bit of a difference in view here. So this one is actually more about putting examples in, both good and bad. We're going to talk in more detail in a few minutes about this, what are shots in the world of AI. But the next topic I want to look at is the deep research, closely aligned to this sort of deep thinking and reasoning models. And over the last 3 or 4 months, all the big players, Gemini, OpenAI, Claude, etc., have been coming out with their versions of deep research. This is the one from Perplexity. And what I particularly like about Perplexity is, as well as searching the web, you can also ask it to search academic papers and also social media, LinkedIn, Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Or you could just ask it just to search, say, social media and turn off the web search. So maybe you want to find out what chat there's been about maybe your rebranding of your company on social media. The other tools don't have that degree of granularity. So that's one reason why I like using the Perplexity version. And again, like the reasoning model, it'll show you all the steps and the logic it goes through. Again, top tip, worth always running these twice. Run it once see its logic, see if there are bits you'd like to change in a second run through. And often you will then improve it maybe 10, 20% by doing that. This is just part of the answer. This one had about 18 pages. Again, not enough room on the screen, but they give a much more rich, nuanced outputs. It'll also show you the sources it looked at. And one of the things about deep research is you might look through hundreds of sources of information, websites, etc. Whereas a typical Google search tends just to look through kind of everything and anything. The typical non-reasoning models mainly go to maybe half a dozen websites. So that's one of the big differences by using the deep research. It'll show you the sources so you can go and check the veracity to make sure you're happy it's used quality information. This is Google's version of deep research in their Gemini model. And on the far left-hand side, something that I do like about it is before it goes off and does its research, it shows you its approach, its methods. Again, a bit like asking your summer graduate, well, before you go off, just run me through what are the 5 or 6 steps, activities, research topics you're going to do. And you'll see that there's an edit plan button. So if you want to, you could even fine tune its plan before it goes off for its first run. It'll then go off. These things can take 10, 20, even 30 minutes. People say, my gosh, 30 minutes, isn't that rubbish in the world of AI? Given that this kind of research might take you, a human, 2 or 3 days to achieve, 30 minutes is actually very good, and it'll only get better with time. On the right-hand side of the middle of the page, you can see the kinds of outputs. Again, there wasn't room for all of it. But in the middle, you can see its logic that it went through. So it started by thinking, what do I need to do? Looked at some websites, then thought, what's next? Looked at some more websites. It then shows me all the websites it's used. Nice feature with Google, as well as showing you the websites that it used, it'll also show the websites that it looked at but did not use. And asking it, well, why didn't you use this website or that website? That can give you some very interesting insights. Again, like asking your human research person, well, why didn't you use Harvard reviews or the BBC business page? Oh, well, Mike, data was 2 years old. Ah, that makes sense. Thank you. And then here's an example from Google's answer. Now, I didn't specifically say make any tables, but it did it off its own bat, thinking that would be useful to help portray the data and make it more digestible for me. This is ChatGPT's version. Again, they're all subtly different, and ChatGPT will invariably stop and ask you some clarifying questions before it dives in and starts working. Again, rather like your human assistants might stop and start and say, oh, could I just clarify a few points with you before I go off and do my work? It will then show you how many sources, how long it takes, etc. So here's an example where it took 6 minutes, did 141 searches over 46 source documents. And then again, here's part of a 18-page document that came back from ChatGPT. So if you've not yet played with the deep researches, they're available even in the free models. You only get perhaps half a dozen a week or a day. If you've got a paid version, probably unlimited. The nice thing about these, you could get them off running in one window or tab and carry on working on something else while it runs away in background. Next little quiz question. Which of these do you think is an advanced prompting technique for these generative AI large language models? eye-opening. So a variety of views here. Most people going for the red block, which is yet probably the answer that I would choose out of those. Think about using examples. The next thing I want to talk about is what they call follow-up questions. It's called ChatGPT for a reason. It's designed to be chatted with. And whereas with a classic Google search, you sort of ask it a question, get an answer, move on. These generative AI models are designed to go backwards and forwards, chatting and refining a number of times. Like we do with human colleagues, human friends, we chat backwards and forwards as we develop and mature our ideas. Why do you think, and this is an open text, why do you think follow-on questions are a good idea? Which of these, and you can answer against several of these. Fantastic, fantastic. And certainly a couple of those, it's great for helping refine and for putting in missing context. Also, it can help you explore a range of different angles and options. Again, the way we would working with human friends and colleagues. At the end of the day, it's mimicking natural conversations. Why it's called language models, because it works very much the way that we use language in our daily interactions. A number of the models, when it gives you an answer, there's the prompt box for you to carry on with the conversation. But some of them, and here's an example from Perplexity, it may also suggest, the 5 most likely sort of follow-on questions that people might ask. Now, you could just type in, what are some unique destinations for a weekend getaway? What the model's trying to do is help you fast track by clicking on one button. It saves you having to type or dictate into a microphone that. Another thing I've noticed quite recently in Google, I'm not sure I've seen it elsewhere, but when a reply has come back in the prompt box, there's the hamburger 3 little dot icon. If you click on that, there's a double check response feature appeared in the last 2 or 3 months. That might be worthwhile looking at. If you're a little bit skeptical about the quality, ask it to, in effect, check its own homework and go and have another look at that. The next thing I want to talk about is canvas mode. Canvas mode. And could you in the chat, if you've used canvas mode, put a yes, and if you've not used canvas mode, put a no. So in the chat, could you give me a yes or a no if you've used any of the canvas modes? Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Jerome. Thanks, Andreas. Thanks, Taham. So these again are probably 4 or 5 months old. Most of the models, ChatGPT, Gemini, have these available. A lot of people are using them, especially if you're coding, where in effect you get 2 windows, a left and a right-hand side to the window, and it allows you to code in one and actually see the rendering of the code in the other. I'm using it more to help me analyze data and also modify text. And today's session, I've got about sort of 50, 55 minutes of sort of content and quizzes. And then for those that don't need to rush away, I'll stay online for another 5, 10, 20 minutes, as long as you want to, doing some live demonstrations and taking any other questions that you've got. And one of those demos I will do is of some of the new features in the Canvas mode from Gemini. But classically, you would put in whatever information you want the Canvas mode to help you with. And then you can see on the left-hand side, I've got the standard sort of chat type interface. And the Canvas mode is in blue to indicate it's activated. Then the right-hand side, it's taken my text and it looks a little bit like a Word or a Google Docs editor. So I can sort of put bullets, I can embolden, italicize, etc. But I could then type into the left-hand prompt, could you make this a shorter document? And then it would in real time go through my text and shorten it. Now you might see in the bottom right-hand corner is an oval shape with sort of 3 icons in. And these are sort of fast track buttons. So I think the top one in Google is to lengthen or shorten. So instead of having to type it in, please lengthen this by 20%, I could use the fast click buttons and it would do it instantaneously. These are from ChatGPT, and these are the kind of these quick edits, fast track buttons. So there's one for adding emojis. There's one for doing a final polish. I'll show an example in a moment. There's one where you can change the reading level. Maybe you want to go from university graduate down to high school student and make it an easier thing to read. And most of them have a length button. Something else that they've added, both Gemini and ChatGPT, one of the fast track buttons will go through your text and suggest possible improvements. A bit like your English teacher going through your essay and highlighting in red pen certain areas where perhaps you could rewrite it to make it work better or flow more naturally. So you can see some examples on this screen. And the little sort of blue diamond is Google's sort of AI symbol. So you know that the AI is being at work. And so I could go through and think, oh, yes, I like that. I'll accept that. That one I don't agree, I'll ignore. And then if I run the final edits button, this is an example of it's now put it into a nice look and feel, larger headings, heading numbers, nice bullet points, lines between the topics, etc. Canvas mode can also do things like visualizations. Now, don't worry about the code in the right-hand window here. That's the machine generating code to help itself. You don't need to know anything about coding. If you do, that's fabulous, but it's just the machine using it. So here's an example where I wanted a scatter diagram. So it went off, did its magic, and this was then the output that it gave me. And as I say, if you stay for the demos at the end, I'll try and show you, if I can make it work in live mode, some of the infographics and web pages that Google can now generate straight from Canvas mode. Next little quiz question. Any idea what a generative reasoning model is? Which of these is the best definition of a reasoning model? Got banana. Well done, everybody. Lots of house points for Ravenclaw. Well done. I've mentioned examples and shots a couple of times. To me, they're both a introductory and certainly an intermediate prompting tool. Zero shot is where you have no examples, and by and large, examples I would always recommend you think about using. The one time maybe not to use any examples is if you're doing pure creativity. I do a lot of innovation in my day job, and I want the machine to come up with wild and wacky and strange ideas. And if I give it some examples, I might rather sort of lead the witness down a certain avenue and it might not come back with such a diverse range of options. But by and large, thinking about using examples is a good idea. This actually is from the French tool Mistral, which is one of the few non-US or Chinese generative AI products. And a tip I've seen on the web is you can give both good and bad examples. If you're doing that, put the good examples first in your prompt and the bad examples afterwards. For some reason, that gives a slightly better output. So here's another example, again from Mistral, where I'm giving an example of what a good email structure looks like. Again, think if you're working with a human being, if you gave them some examples of the kind of reports you've written in the past, they'll be able to replicate that. If you give them no examples, who knows what style they might use? A screen you might want to take a photo or a screenshot of, but a few perhaps advanced techniques in the world of examples. One is, I say, to use both good and bad as contrastive examples. Another is to get it to show you its step-by-step reasoning. And if you're using a reasoning model or a thinking model, it'll do that by default now. Varying the complexity of your examples, maybe some simple, some medium, and some longer, hard examples. Using a diverse range of examples. And then also providing some structured outputs, maybe a couple of examples of an email you like to use a style, of a report, of maybe a blog post. And doing that will help the model generate a response more in accord with what you're after. Just another quick yes, no in the chat. If you've used styles at all, give me a yes. And if you haven't, give me a no. Let me go quiet for a few seconds while you either put a yes or a no in the chat, please. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Taha. I often get asked, Mike, can I sort of train these models to write in my house style? Maybe you've got a personal writing style. Maybe your organization has sort of brand and marketing guidelines that you want to adhere to. All the models you can sort of train by giving them examples, but Claude, which is perhaps the number 3 model behind ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, it's actually got a unique style option. Now, I suspect all these companies tend to copy each other. The others might do this in due course. But within the Claude model, at the bottom, there's a little style button. And if you click on that before you start conversing with it, you'll see that there are some preordained styles, normal, concise, formal. But you can also create your own house style. And it's very simple. You go and click on the button to do that. And then it asks you to either upload some maybe copies of a report, example emails, or just cut and paste text in. So here's me where I've cut and pasted some text. It then runs off, takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes to analyze your writing style. And then it will create a named writing style. Now, if you want to rename it, you can do that. It will come up with a default name. So here I've got one called Technology Strategist. What you can then do is build up maybe ones that are particular persona style, or maybe the Mike style, the David style. So the next time you come in, just click on the style you want to use, and your conversations will inherit those characteristics. So if you've not thought about using styles, definitely worthwhile having a look at that. Next little quiz question. Which of these are advanced prompting techniques that lead to better outputs? And there may be more than one correct answer. Interesting, interesting. A range of different views there. So let's see how Hufflepuff House did this time. So well done. Yes, there are 3 potentials on there. So a lot of house points flowing after that question. Well done. The next thing I want to mention is a thing called spaces. Depending on the platforms you're using, they've perhaps got different names, artifacts, projects, etc. But it's a way of sharing work with colleagues. This is, again, an example from Perplexity, and it allows you to maybe work on a particular topic, maybe you yourself, and or share with a range of colleagues. And especially if you're doing research, this can be a great way of putting your materials together and then doing conversations and iterations with them. So some of the key sort of features, you can upload a range of different types of documents. You can invite others to collaborate, either read, edit, or just read only. You can also do searches, both within the uploaded files and all the web sources. You can also set specific instructions, and this is why I like these. Now, you can set custom instructions at the default level in your ChatGPT, Gemini, etc. But then every conversation that you have will use that same custom instructions, and that might not be what you want. So here, what you might do is have one space, as I've got in this example, where I'm a seasoned business consultant, and I want it to act and think in that way. I've got another space where I want it to be a language tutor, maybe a French or an Italian or a Spanish tutor. So the custom instructions will only then affect that particular space. So you might have a range of spaces doing a range of different topics or particular skill sets or running particular pieces or packages of work for you. So that's why I like these, because I can be very specific in what each space is doing for me. There's a big range of use cases. This isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, whether it's research where the initial idea came from for this kind of the technology. Education, I do a lot of work in training. I know people who use it as their tutor. Perhaps they've got a project management qualification exam next week. Upload all their training documents, materials, manuals, and then get the machine to act as a personal tutor, maybe doing quiz questions, giving you personal feedback on how well you answered the question. Next little quiz question. Which of these is considered an advanced prompting technique? I think we've done this one. I think that's up. Here we go. Here we go. I also like a little bit of fun on these sessions. Slight joke, but where will these things go to? Interestingly, OpenAI, one of their board is now got some job title like sort of AI rights and ethics. Will there come a point in the future where if we've got all these AI agents working for us, could they have some kind of workers' rights? Maybe the way that we do as humans working in organizations. That's a little bit down the track, but given how long it takes for moral, ethical, political discussions to take place and how quickly this technology is changing, I think OpenAI is sensible to be considering this now and not waiting. The next thing I want to talk about is talking to models. And this is where I'm going to try and be brave. And Rianne, if I could get you to come off mute a sec and just let me know, Rianne, can you see Welcome to AI Studio? I don't know, but I've still got Rianne in the... What I'm going to try and be brave on is actually demonstrate having a live conversation with one of the models. Uh, So I can see, Andrews has a question, aren't spaces the same as different chat threads? They are, but they have more that you can do within them, Andrews. Things like setting that particular bit of context. Thank you, Taha. Now, Taha, could you let me know in a moment if you can also hear the voice? So this is Google AI Studio, which is one of their sort of test development centers. And you can often get the most up-to-date tools on here for free. If you are using it for free, be careful because you are signing away anything you put in, they will use in their training. I think, but do check. If you've got a paid Google account, then you can toggle off the use my data for training purposes. I've got a free account. So this talk feature should allow me to have an interaction.
Well, diet is super important. Focusing on a balanced diet with plenty of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and lean protein is.
Could I ask you in the chat to put a yes, we can hear? If you can hear Google, there's a lady's voice. If you can let me know in the chat if you can hear the lady's voice, that's great. Thank you. So this allows me to actually then have a conversation with the model. So let me see if I can go back and get that to run again. Good morning, Google.
Good morning to you too. How can I help you today?
Can you tell me what Web3 is, please?
Web3 is a concept for the next generation of the internet, focusing on decentralization, user control of data, and technologies like blockchain. It's about making the web more user centric and less reliant on big companies.
That's great. Right, I'm going to kill that one. So if you prefer to talk to these machines, you can do that. And a lot of them, especially the mobile versions on your phone, you can put that kind of feature on as well. The other thing I wanted to try and demonstrate, this one's a bit more risky, is to actually get it to act as a tutor. So I can share my screen, and if I can get it, I'm going to go to share. Could you let me know in the chat if you can see a Excel spreadsheet? Can you see an Excel spreadsheet?
Yes, I can see an Excel spreadsheet. It has some names and ages in it.
Fantastic. Can you tell me how
Great.
to can you tell me how to
Okay,
create a pivot table?
sure. To create a pivot table, first select the data you want to use. Then go to the Insert tab in the ribbon. On the left side, you'll see a Pivot Table button. Click on that. A dialog box will appear, and you can choose where you want the pivot table to be placed, either in a new worksheet or an existing one. Once you've selected your options, click OK. Then you can drag the fields from your data into the different areas of the
Thank
pivot
you,
table field.
thank you. Stop there. So that was an
You're
example.
welcome. Is there
Go
any
away, go away. They can get very chatty. But that was a great example where I'm using the model as my personal sort of tutor. Now, when I first started work 1,000 years ago, if I got stuck, I would turn to my colleague in the desk next door to me and say, can you show me how to do a pivot table? And he or she would spend a few minutes explaining what to do. Now I can show the model what it is I'm struggling with and ask it in real time to walk me through what I need to do. So if you've not seen or played with these talking models, I would certainly recommend having a look at those. Another tool that I wanted to share with you, again, it's one that you can talk to and type to, is an online companion coach tool. Now, we all know the value of coaching and mentors. And some of you may have been lucky, as I have, to actually have had coaches and mentors, maybe in your careers. But there aren't many to go around, and often it's only very senior people that get access to them. So this is a AI companion coach for all the people that can't get access to live coaches. And one use case is where Maybe you're a first-time manager and you've got a difficult conversation coming up with one of your staff. I've got an example here where I was struggling with one of my staff about them turning up to work late. And I don't know about you, but I'm not very good at giving sort of bad news, constructive criticism to people. So I wanted some help before this difficult conversation. So I can go into the language model and ask it, and it will give me some advice. Also, it can give me videos, and that is my ugly face in this video, and it's all in 3-minute TikTok style short chunks. I could also perhaps have a practice conversation with the AI, with it role playing being Tom, my awkward colleague who turns up to work late, and then get feedback on that conversation before going to have that difficult conversation. So that's one use case. In the flow of work, I need help and assistance. Another is the more fortnightly, monthly, 1.5 hour coaching session that some of you might have done. And this is much more in that backwards and forwards coaching style of only asking questions and not offering advice. So you can see here, I was going backwards and forwards, getting some questions, things about what I might do with Tom and his bad punctuality. And then what's nice is the system can actually then choose for you your own personalized kind of learning path. Again, all in kind of 3-minute nuggets. Now, I'm rubbish at giving people feedback. So this walks me through some advice, maybe some exercises I can do, maybe some videos that I can watch. Again, all in real time. And what the Unitas team have done is they've got about a dozen highly qualified, experienced coaches to build the prompts and to put in knowledge you won't find on ChatGPT. This is people's personal years of experience. James Alvarez is an ex-FBI hostage negotiator, for instance. Vanessa Cudworth, I think, used to work for the BBC as a news journalist and therefore knows all about communication skills. You can also ingest training. There's a thing that I come across called the forgetting curve. The forgetting curve. Within about 2 days, you'll have forgotten half of what I told you today. By a week's time, you'll have forgotten 3/4. We forget a lot of stuff quickly. But with this kind of tool, you can ingest the training. So I could upload today's pack and you could tell it, oh, I've done Mike's 102 course. And because it knows that, it could, like a human might prompt you. So it might ask you, Dennis, you did the 102 course. What was the 555 model? And if you can't remember, it can tell you. And it's a way of just reconfirming, reiterating, reminding you of your learning, and it helps with knowledge retention. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed that AI could augment coaches, but I've now seen the power of what these tools can do. And this is still version 1. Who knows what version 3 will look like in 2 or 3 years' time. So there are various models out there that you can talk to via typing, but also now talk to by dictating with your voice. I'm going to flip back into my main presentation pack. And if you could just let me know again in the chat, you can sort of on this stream using Slider. Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you for that. If you could let me know in the chat, could you just put the word PowerPoint in the chat to indicate that I've come back into the PowerPoint, and I'm just putting up the next quiz question, which is an open text one. Where might you use these kind of coaching tools in your organization? Thanks, Andres. Thank you. Some intriguing examples coming up. certainly personal development, mentoring interns, definitely newcomers. I know a number of companies looking at using this as part of onboarding. If you remember the last time you joined an organization, you're often swamped in those early weeks with all sorts of information, most of which you would have forgotten very quickly, but need to know where to find it later on. One-to-one sessions, definitely in the 360 feedback, which I think is very important. Vibe coding, I love that thought. That's a great answer. Love that. 2 extra house points to Gryffindor there. So these kind of tools, I can just see getting more and more powerful, more and more useful with time. I'm just coming up to the end of my sort of main session, and I'm going to show Notebook LM in more detail when we get there. So I'm going to quickly flip through this set and just go to my next quiz question. Can you remember what the 3-5-5-5 rule is for those that joined us on the last course? What is the 5-5-5 rule? And my 5-minute tech guru, this is one maybe you want to steal and use. Yeah, again, I love that fostering culture of wide learning. Most certainly, most certainly. A bit of a split vote here. And yes, it's important thing is that don't think AI is a panacea. It's not the answer to everything. If it's going to take you 30 seconds to do something, just get on with it. It'll take you longer to get ChatGPT booted up than the length of the task. I'm going to show as part of the demonstration, but for those that can't stay on, Google in their laboratory, again, as part of their experimental, have got a lovely little tool for practicing your prompting techniques. What it does is it shows you a picture, and then you need to then put a prompt in that will generate that picture. So bronze 12-inch model of a horse with its left foreleg in the air, other legs on the ground, mounting on a wooden plinth. It'll then go and generate picture based on your prompt. And it will then compare and contrast the original with what you prompted. And then you can see how close you got or not. You could go back, you could change a couple of the words, press go again, and see what changing 2 or 3 words, or perhaps the ordering of the words, has on the output. So it's a free to use tool, and it's a lot of fun, but actually a great way of seeing the impact of just changing even 2 or 3 words in a prompt for the output. So a couple of final tips in this sort of formal part before I do the live demos. We mentioned this 5-5-5 rule. If something's going to take you more than, say, 5 minutes, and you could use it maybe several times, like a template, maybe across several areas, it's probably worthwhile investing a bit of time up front and then reuse. A bit like a Word template, a PowerPoint template. A big mistake most people are making, but you now won't. Prompting has actually got 3 key elements to it. There's the planning part. We all know in the world that failure to plan is planning to fail. Most people go straight to the prompting part without any proper planning. And we all know that the best work we do does have planning involved. But then, because it's not like sort of Google where you might get an answer and that's it, with these ChatGPT models, you need to go back 2, 3, 4 times, like we do with human beings, refining, polishing, fine-tuning the response. So prompting has a preparation, the actual prompt, and then refining, fine-tuning, and polishing. There are 3 stages to it. A bit like running a marathon. You wouldn't dream of running a marathon without essentially months of preparation and training. The actual race itself is over in half a day, and then you're perhaps 2 or 3 days at home recovering with your legs aching like mad. You now know the secret to good prompting. It isn't just stealing somebody else's prompt, putting it in and pressing go. Invariably, that gives you a poor response. You need to do proper preparation, and you need to refine, reiterate, polish. So there are 3 stages, not 1. And my sort of final reminder is risk. Always stop and think, what am I sharing with these models? Where's it being stored? Am I in an organization with a firewall? What are the guardrails? What are my local AI policies? What am I taking out the models? Do I believe it? Is it hallucinating? I think if in doubt, stop, don't, think, go and ask an expert, go and review your AI policies. As for things like social media, once you've posted it, it's hard to get it off again. So just keep your critical eye, your critical hat on at all times. And my sort of final thought here is I've been working for a couple of thousand years now, and when I first helped the Egyptians build the pyramids, there were some key skills like critical thinking, creativity, communication skills, collaboration, and they haven't changed since I helped the Egyptians. Then I went to Rome to help the Romans build the Colosseum. Then I moved to England to help the Victorians. I used to use clay tablets and carrier pigeons. Then we had calculators and mobile phones. And now we've got ChatGPT. The tools are changing, but your core skills, I think, haven't changed over the centuries. So that wraps up the formal part of the session. If you need to rush off now, I will take no offense. That is, again, my details. If you want to take a screen capture, do drop me a LinkedIn message, an email, and I'll happily share some of the handouts that I've got from this session. We're looking next month, we hope to put on some more reactors. Well, I'll repeat these sessions, but also I hope to do an advanced 103 prompting and also a session around managing AI agents. But for now, those that need to go, great to see you all. Look forward to seeing you on other sessions. Those that would like to stay on for a few minutes and see some live demos, I'm just rotating back to the interface. And the first tool I was going to show was a bit of a fun one called Why-Bot. Why-Bot. You may have come across a technique called the 5 whys technique. It's where you ask the question why 5 times in a row. Well, why do you do that? Why is that? Why have you always done it that way? And when you keep asking that why question, you start to dig under the surface, the real problem at hand. If any of you have small children, nephews, nieces, it's what small children do all the time to annoy their parents. Why, mummy? Why, daddy? Why? And what Whybot does is it takes your question and it asks that first level why question. And then it goes to a second level and asks the second why, and then a third why. And it just keeps on breaking down, decomposing your initial problem into smaller and smaller chunks. Now, a number of these sort of chains or routes or paths may go to obvious answers, things you know, but it might turn up at, ooh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that one. So it's a little bit of fun. And it just shows some clever people in California came up with this idea. So that's one that's called Why Bot. I mentioned Claude a little earlier as one of the main tools, probably in third position behind ChatGPT and Google's Gemini. Many people say it's one of the better ones for doing coding. And also historically, it's been one of the better ones if you want to do sort of an essay or a blog post, that it writes very well. And this is putting it into what's called that canvas mode, where I can, on the right-hand side, I might ask, can you shorten the length? And let's see whether my internet connection is holding up or not. So you can see in real time in the Canvas right-hand window, it's rewriting that initial bit of text in a shortened way, but that's what I asked it to do. And there we go. And then I could publish that, I could copy it, either as Markdown or I could save that as a PDF. And I mentioned with Claude that one of the tools it's got is this use style tool. And that's one of the reasons why I like it for writing. But everyone's got their own preferences. But that is the Claude tool. Just going to see if I can get Mistral open. I had problems earlier with Mistral. Mistral is a French-based tool, one of the few sort of non-American or Chinese chatbots. Perhaps I'll ask it for an image of a cat by a window. And I've not particularly covered much around images and videos. Partly because I don't do a huge amount in that myself, but it tends to be a bit of a niche area. Most people are using it for more general, whether it's brainstorming, report generation, deep research. But a lot of these models and ChatGPT in the last couple of months have really improved the quality of their image generation. And of course, you iterate. So I might say, redraw with a second cat, rain falling outside. Because I've got some of the free versions, sometimes I hit you've run out of credits for the day, but we'll see whether I've still got enough credits. So there we go. And so it's now redrawn it as a kitten. You will find that within the Google AI Studio model, they've recently updated all their websites for doing image generation. So I wonder what we do, cat in a window. This one can take a little bit longer to run. So if it runs for too slow, I might leave it in background and look at something else. So there we go. So this is the new Imogen version from OpenAI. And they've also got their one VO for making images. So how about cat walking through a field? Oh, this one, you've been cute. You may find with some of these, especially as people are getting excited, I think VO3 is now out as well, that sometimes you can get queued up. So while that's working in background, I was going to show you this tool from Google Labs, an experimental one, where you can practice your own prompting skills, one I showed a few screenshots of at the end of the main session. So what I got there, a shot of New York skyscrapers taken looking up from the road. You don't have to be perfect with the typing, although sometimes if you have too many typing mistakes, it can cause problem. And there we go. And not quite, because in the original, you actually see some of the road itself. So I could go back to that one and perhaps add an extra few lines taken from the road, show the road in the image. So I love this just for a bit of fun, but a chance to actually see at first hand the impact of just changing a few words in a prompt and how that pans out. Let's go back and see whether our cat, here we go. Here's our cat video. To my mind, that is just scary. In a matter of minutes, a real lifelike video of a cat, albeit only 8 seconds, Again, this is still experimental. What will version 2 look like in 3 years' time? I don't know. We can have a guess as to what that might be the case. This is Google Gemini in its canvas mode. And you can see the bottom left-hand corner that the canvas mode is on. And some new features they have added just recently. So I was doing a little bit of work thinking about how do I get return on investment for using generative AI? A question many people ask. Why should I spend $30, $40, $50, $100 a month on an AI license? So I put my text in. So this was the original. And then you can now ask it to create things like web pages and infographics. And it in real time, what would have taken you maybe hours, maybe even days to create an infographic or a website or a quiz in real time based on the information that you put into the canvas. Now, again, this could take a couple of minutes while it runs in background. So I'm going to hop over to ChatGPT. It's a shame I had asked it earlier to create an image for me, and you can see that because so many people are using it at the moment, it's still stuck in the queue.
Hi, Mike. We might need to wrap
Yep.
up shortly.
Righto, I've got about 2 more things to show. So here it is. It's coming up with the web page, and so it's showing me the actual code that you can use for the web page. And then when it's finished, it'll then allow me to preview how that will look in real time. So while that's doing, let me look at the last tool, which is Notebook LM, which if you joined us for the previous session, we were showing this as well. This allows you to upload documents and then you can interrogate them. But the nice feature is you can create a podcast from this.
The Eisenhower Matrix is an amazing tool
It's all about managing your time.
and tasks really effectively.
It helps you figure out what's urgent.
So this actually allows you, if you prefer to listen to something rather than to read it, this is great for your preferred learning style. But the neat feature of this is you can stop the podcast and ask it questions based on the information that you've uploaded.
Urgent.
And what's truly important.
Oh, yeah,
I've got a question. What is the Eisenhower matrix?
And that's a great follow-up question.
Yes, and we're happy to dive deeper into it.
So we briefly mentioned it helps distinguish between urgent and important tasks.
So it's like having me in the machine on call 24 hours a day to answer your questions. And again, I know people who use this as a kind of training tutor where they upload all the materials from their training course for their exam and then get it to question you, and you can ask it questions as part of your exam preparation. Let's go back and see whether the Gemini has finished. And here we go. So this is an outline for a dashboard that it's created. If I go back up to the top, here's a version of a quiz that it can create for me. Here's an example of a mood board that it can create for me. So I can ask it to output in a whole range. And here's an example of an infographic. I can ask it to output in a whole range of different pictorial styles, as well as just the text. This has only been around for a couple of weeks. And the last neat feature to share with you is you can actually ask it in the moment to add interactive AI features directly into the infographic, which is things that you couldn't do in the past. So we're just on 20 past the hour. So I think we need to be wrapping up at that point. So all I can say is a huge thank you to Rhiannon for organising today's event. Thank you for your enthusiasm taking part in all the quizzes. I will just risk putting on my camera. Hopefully I won't crash my internet. Just to wave and say it wasn't an AI avatar running the last session. I've actually been a human being down here in Bristol. Hope to see you all again on other sessions that the Reactor are doing, and good luck with all your AI prompting. Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye, everyone.